So I once had a friend ask me like what my favorite language is. And obviously I think that's an impossible question. It's like a Sophie's choice. It's like choosing your favorite song or your favorite child, right? Um, but I think like the way I responded is kind of what inspired this video, which is I want to make an argument for English. Um, and the crux of the argument is this, right? That like English is a language that has always been marked by an insane amount of multiplicity and diversity and people coming together and learning the language. And I think to illustrate this, I want to talk about like a kind of overlooked period in English language history, in my opinion, which is like the Norse invasion. Um, so essentially, for like a period of about 500 years until the Norman conquest, which is when the French invaded, you had this entire section of England that was pretty much like under Norse, or you can call it like Danish control, right? They called it the Danelaw at the time. And what you see in terms of like its impact on English is not kind of like what we would see with the Norse invasion. With the Norman conquest, like later on. What we see, right? So what we see with like the Norman conquest, for example, right, is like an elite group of like elite French language speakers, and then a lower class of like English peasants. So we have a lot of vocabulary transfer, right? Like 40% of English's vocabulary right now comes from French. But the Norman conquest like didn't like change like the bones of English, right? Like it didn't change the grammar and the structure and all of these things. What we see with like the Danelaw and like the Norse invasion is completely different. The bones, the structure of English itself radically changes, right? So Old English is more akin to German in terms of like grammatical gender than you would expect. So for example, Old English had 3 genders. It had 4 cases. So if you don't know what a grammatical case is, don't worry. I'm just going to post up here like all the words for the in German, because the word the has to agree with case, gender, and number. So yeah, if you speak English, or especially if you're learning English, like maybe you should be thankful that you don't have to kind of like use that right now. And we also see like an intense, like our nouns simplify a lot, right? So if you ever get confused by English irregular plurals, right? So for example, fish and fish, and sheep and sheep, and goose and geese, and tooth and teeth, and child and children. The reason those are there is because those were once regular plurals for a certain like for certain classes of nouns, right? And we've completely lost that, and now it's just kind of like the nouns that don't fit the without s and with s for singular and plural. Now we just kind of call that irregular nouns, right? So all of these like intense changes happen to English, which kind of suggests to us that like this wasn't like a ruling class. This was like entire bilingual communities set up, right? Of people who like needed to speak English. And obviously like we're not native English language speakers, so they end up simplifying the language to communicate with the locals, right? We probably had like children speaking like Norselish or something like that, right? Like these kind of like the same way we have people speaking Spanglish, or I grew up speaking Tumlish, right? Like within the kind of like generations down, we have like people kind of like mixing these languages together and really just fundamentally changing English, right? So yeah, I think that like that's the argument I would make, right? Is that like obviously now English is the site of a lot of cultural exchange, right? And that's going to mark English for the rest of its history, obviously. But it's always been like this, right? Like English has always been a radically changing language, and it's always been radically changing because of contact between very different groups of people, right? This is the core of English history. And I guess I just want to put a note for, I guess, like people of color, right? Like obviously like the way this language got to us hasn't always been ideal, right? Like I'm Indian. It didn't come to my people without violence, right? But now that it's here, now that it's ours as well, right? Now that, any survey of English literature is going to include William Shakespeare down to James Baldwin, right? Like now that it's ours as well, like I think let's appreciate that history, and let's appreciate the fact that it's always been the site of like an intense amount of like cultural exchange.